Our Leviticus 6, let's call this one kept burning, because that is exactly the condition in which the fire on the brazen altar is to be maintained as we continue the discussion of the sacrifices. And there are really 5. We talked about 3 in particular, but in total, there's really the burnt offering, there is the grain offering, the peace offering, which is where we really picked up talking about them in particular. And then after that, the sin offering and the guilt offerings that we also emphasized in the last few chapters. But now, picking up in chapter 6, really going through to chapter 7, we're going to look at them from the perspective of the priests. And that whole concept of kept burning caught my attention, really just the term kept, because if you've ever had to deal with fires, whether it's a barbecue or campfire or anything similar, then you understand that they can require a decent amount of attention to maintain. And so the responsibilities of the priest stood out to me this time, understanding in previous chapters, we've talked about how these chapters focusing on the priests are going to talk about what they get out of it, but they don't get anything out of it cheap. Why? Because just like we talked about with Moses, drawing near to God brings a certain level of prestige in certain moments, but it came at a high cost. Understanding by now, we've seen Moses fast for 40 days on 2 different stints, something that not everybody got to do, even though not everybody got to be as close to God as Moses did. Likewise with Aaron, we're going to see Aaron in a very few chapters lose 2 sons because they are not going to pay proper attention to detail. And some of those details are going to be spelled out here. And it starts with that fire that's supposed to be kept burning. That's not going to be the reason why his 2 sons get in trouble, but this is going to kind of set the tone for the way they need to look at every responsibility before God in the tabernacle. Beginning in verse 8 of chapter 6, it's going to say, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, command Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. The burnt offering shall be on the hearth of the altar all night until the morning, and the fire of the altar shall be kept burning on it. Skipping down to verse 12, it's going to tell us even more about that fire when it says, the fire on the altar shall be kept burning on it. It shall not go out. And then down to verse 13, fire shall be kept burning on the altar continually. It shall not go out. And so once again, it's attention to detail in a small matter, but it's going to be important to make that habit forming, because later on, they're going to apparently not pay enough attention to detail. It's going to cost them greatly. We'll talk about that in more detail later, but look at it from this perspective. Every now and again, we will hear of a salmonella outbreak at the grocery store or something similar, in a situation where you might have a top cut of meat, but inattention to detail in the temperature of that meat can make people sick. Likewise, chefs, they understand that not only is it important to make sure the recipes are on point and the quality of the ingredients are top notch, but a great cut of meat, once again, in a stew or something like that, can be ruined by something as simple as bad onions. And so attention to detail is something that we depend on. Sometimes I use sports analogies. We always say the refs are typically considered to be at their best when we're not paying attention to them. But in order for them to stay out of the spotlight, they got to pay extremely high attention to detail to make sure that they're getting it right, so we can see who we really came to see at a particular sporting event. And so likewise, in our daily routines, the extreme attention to detail that we can pay on the front end can help us avoid bad press and bad publicity on the back end in an era where we are living in a time that's commonly called cancel culture. Cancel culture seems to be common to this era. And the Bible's going to say it like this in Ecclesiastes. A similar principle is going to come out of Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 1, where it says, dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench. So a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. We've probably heard about it from the wise people in our lives, whether you're in the church or not. It only takes a moment to destroy a great reputation. And that's not to use a scare tactic, but understand that we have to pay attention to detail on both the front end and the back end. The front end so that we can become as successful as we aspire to be, but on the back end, making sure that we pay enough attention to detail in our downtime, because understanding when we're tired, exhausted, or frustrated, we can be tempted to do things that are out of character. So my encouragement for each and every one of us is to be balanced, both on the front end as we try to aspire to do great things, and on the back end as we try to maintain those things, that we pay proper attention to detail as we try to make the best of our opportunities.